And we're live. Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is MC and MADD Talk the Civil War. This is episode 8, the Battle of Belmont. It's a really small battle, but it was one of the first conflicts that Grant actually participated in the war. And yeah, I forgot to mute the watch page, so I heard my own voice. Sorry about that. But yeah, this is one of the first battles that Grant actually commands in the entire war, and it kicks off action in the West. How are you doing today, MC?
Oh, sorry for being late. It wasn't Mad Dog's fault. It was completely mine. So I apologize for being a little bit late today.
Oh, it's all good. No one ever wants the Yankees to show up on time anyway. You know? But I'm gonna say hi to the chat. How's it going, Billy Joe Quinn and Jensen, Tiger Lily? How are you guys doing? Let's take a look at the timeline. Set the stage a little bit. Come on, load, you slow ass computer. Speaking of slow computers, I do have a Patreon if you want to help me get some RAM to speed up this computer. No, I'm kidding. Kind of. Okay, this battle took place on November 7th, 1861. The command of the Union forces was Ulysses S. Grant, and the commander of the Confederates was General Leonidas Polk. The Confederate forces were 5,000 deep, while the Union had 3,114 troops. We'll get to the casualties after we're done here. Yeah, so November 7th, 1861. This is really early in the war, is it not?
Yes, it's early, but it is in the West. What's happening in the West at this point is there's a lot of coalescing going on. All right. What I mean by that is the border states, which Missouri is one of them, right, has a lot of little things happening all over the place.
Well, and specifically, the governor of Missouri was a Confederate sympathizer. He wanted to join the Confederacy, did he not?
Yes, he was, and but there's a stronger sentiment throughout Missouri, right, of not to fight at all. It's kind of a strange situation. You have in the major city, which is obviously St. Louis, all right, dueling parades of drilling troops for the Union and for the Confederacy that are happening, right? You have several things going on. People don't want there to be a battle. The governor uh, has actually when Lincoln takes charge, right, and starts asking for the call up, the governor actually refuses, saying, you can't tell me to call anybody up. You can't bring anybody up from Missouri.
Yeah,
That doesn't stop people from Missouri from
volunteering.
joining.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, okay, you can't raise a militia. And see, this goes back to one of the differences between today, right, and back then. Back then, there was no mechanism for a draft. There wasn't an order that was going to go out. It will come out of this war to a large extent. All right, but there is no mechanism for the draft at this point. You're relying upon the states to uh, provide you a certain number of troops during a call up, and of course, at this point, the governor says no.
Well, and I think from a union perspective, it actually gets worse than that. And by worse, I mean the guy in charge of the union troops actually gets sent to D.C. by the governor of Missouri. Right? He sends him away. That way um
Not
he
exactly.
can't really.
That's not exactly
Okay,
what's
well,
going
well
on.
then
You look.
elaborate a little bit more because that did happen. Something along those lines, if I remember correctly.
Okay, everybody's war. The biggest city, of course, is, like I said, St. Louis, and in St. Louis there is a federal arsenal, the largest federal arsenal in the West. All right, and the man in charge of it is the Union general, but he's someone who, you got to remember, Fort Sumter hadn't been fired upon at this point. He's trying to avoid the war, right? He's trying to avoid a war happening, and at the same time, he's trying to, maintain his troops and etc. He's trying to stake out a middle ground here. Okay. Now, unfortunately for him, the middle ground doesn't exist, right? He's ignoring the fact that the Confederates are trying to train troops and raise troops right in the middle of Missouri.
Trying? They are. They're drilling in St. Louis, and their
drilling.
force is by far larger than the Union forces.
Actually, not. But that's a different issue. But he's ignoring that fact. He's ignoring them to do it because he doesn't want to kick anything off. Now, you can imagine how there are certain Union soldiers who believe that this is somewhat treasonous. All right, and they're saying, "Hey, you've got to take action," and his refusal of action to them looks as if he's a Southern sympathizer, a mole in the Union Army. Now, you remember what we were talking about earlier of how many Southerners, or I only say Southerners because from the aspect that they went to the fight for the South, many of them have resigned their commissions and joined the South and joined the Confederacy as their states seceded. But not all of them did. And so there was always a question of loyalty. Who are you really loyal to? Right? Especially early on in the war. All right. There's this question of loyalty. Now, while the governor himself was very much he was a Southern sympathizer, for all intents and purposes, Missouri wasn't. Missouri, the populace of Missouri didn't actually had very strong Unionist loyalties. In fact, they were stronger than the sympathies of the Confederacy. Granted,
tell that to the James brothers.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about the James brothers some other day. You just want to bring up the fact that they're a bunch of dicks. But anyway,
I just like Jesse James. So I'll be honest, it's a good story. Continues to fight, robbing banks. It's a good story. That's all. But no, I want to go back to this timeline. We're gonna end the timeline already. The Battle of Belmont is fought on Missouri soil. It marks the first major engagement for Union General Ulysses S. Grant. A force of about 5,000 Confederates square off against 3,100 Union in Mississippi County, Missouri. It is a Confederate victory, but gives Grant much-needed experience in field command. That's it. That's all they have about this.
And I disagree with that outlook. Okay, because first of all, what you have is Grant on the move. Grant uses federal gunboats to put himself in place. Now you got to remember he has fewer troops, right? He lands fewer troops on a section of the river, all right, that he then attacks with. Okay, and this is where Gideon Pillow is currently. Right? So he attacks the forces that are under Gideon Pillow, the overall forces under, which is a portion of Polk's, Leonidas. Is it Leonidas Polk? A portion of Polk's forces, right? And you can see by this map, right? If you want to pull up the one that's up right now.
I pulled this one up and I'm presenting to everybody. You got the Mississippi River right here. You got the Confederates on the other side of the river, which is quite stupid if you ask me. The Mississippi's a pretty wide fucking river. And a small force that is encircled, it looks like to me.
Right. And basically they get encircled because they were throughout this area when Grant, where he lands his forces, you can see he lands his forces on the far left of the map. Right, is where generally he lands his forces and then marches inward.
So are those troop ships or are those gunboats?
Kind of a little bit of mixture of both, but they're not the heavily developed gunboats that quickly get developed. These are the beginnings of the gunboats as they start to develop them. You got to remember, these were hastily put together. Yes, there's some armament on some of them, but they're not the very heavily armored ships that come in later that then can actually stand toe to toe with ground forces. These are lightly armored, but they do have cannon on them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the artillery from the other side of the river actually engage the Union forces here. is that keeping the Confederates that are encircled a shield, so to say?
To an extent, but what they don't show in this thing is the fact that Polk doesn't stay there. Okay, he doesn't sit up there and let his troops, once the troops finally get penned in, he doesn't let them stay there and get slaughtered like he could have. All right, no, of course not. I mean, he's not going to let his troops get slaughtered. He himself sits up there and has boats, and he fords the river, right, and with all of his troops, and then push them back. What Grant is trying to do.
Okay. Oh, come on. Okay, yeah, it's unmuted. All right. So is this when he fords the river and comes in and actually engages the enemy? I didn't notice this map when I was doing research, so kind of glad it popped up right here.
Right. So you see where he begins to ford the river back to provide support because Pillow has been pushed all the way back into that little pocket. And once now this, what you're seeing here is kind of an odd way of portion of that bend, right? But you can see where the Union troops were pushing Gideon all the way down, all right, and then now have to. All the blue is not necessarily the river, I don't think, is it?
No, and I'm also wondering why the Union gunboats did not engage the Confederates as they were crossing the river. That seems like a good time to actually engage the enemy and stop the because this does end up a Confederate victory. What does end up happening is they cross the river, and
these are not the types of ships that can run the gauntlet of those cannons on the bluff. Right. Once again, you gotta remember these don't have the armor. These don't have the armor that they get later on. They become freaking floating gun platforms later on, but they're not there yet. Right now, these are just boats with a few cannon on them. Right.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense too, because the artillery, they don't necessarily take all the artillery with them. They're using it to shield their movements on the ground and their movements across the Mississippi.
Right. Now, this is actually at this point in time, this is also an attempt by Grant, all right, to catch a smaller force out of position, which he basically does. Which is why Pillow gets tossed right back to the edge. All right. But he can't obviously hold it because he has an inferior force. And what happens, of course, is Polk then comes back to sweep in. Grant sits up there and takes his troops and the prisoners that they've captured and returns to the ships and loads them. Now, it's during this portion of it that Grant realizes that some of his troops, who he's ordered to retreat, haven't retreated with him. Right? That's because they've been surrounded. All right. And they're fighting the terrain. He attempts to actually go back to see what's going on, and almost gets captured, and is actually one of the last people to
damn it. You know what? No, you know how history could have changed if Grant was captured and not paroled? Could you imagine that?
Can you imagine how history would have changed if somebody would have shot Robert E. Lee?
Hey, you leave Robert out of this. We're talking about Grant.
Well, we'll talk about how history could have changed in a moment. But no, he was literally the last person on the boat. The boat actually is up for steam, sees him, waits for him to actually ride his horse directly across the gangplank. They pull the gangplank out.
That's pretty insane. Kind of like in the Revolutionary War, a British officer had General Washington in his sights, and he took the shot, and the gun malfunctioned. And so George Washington never got killed.
No, but George Washington often when he was in his battles in the Revolutionary War, and this is true of pretty much almost all the even the forces here during the Civil War, is many of them would return after a battle, and then while they're taking off their clothes for the night, to go to sleep, they see bullet holes that weren't there earlier.
Yeah, that would be pretty intense. But okay, so politically though, because the Confederates, this is a small battle. Grant, okay, I guess you could call it a stalemate. The Confederates claimed victory, of course. But politically, the Confederates probably thought after this battle that Missouri would rise up and join the Confederacy. But she doesn't.
I don't think so. Although there was there was some feeling that all right, actions being taken. The difference was, though, is from a political standpoint, this is actually, and this is the way I look at it, right? This actually is a very negative. All right, you got to remember, for the South, there's two things going on, and what's happening is the other borders. This borders Kentucky, okay, and the other side of Kentucky, a major Union force is pushing down. Right, the fact that Grant actually did this attack prevents Polk from actually reinforcing the Confederates. All right, to allow them to go, into into the interior of Kentucky to help defend the interior of Kentucky, because Kentucky is wide open. But Kentucky is also a border state. There's a lot of Union sympathies. There's there's some Southern sympathies, but overall, there's the populace is more pro-Union than they are pro-Confederate. Even
Well,
though,
is it pro-union, or is it the same as the case of Missouri, where they don't have a dog in the hunt, so to say? They
no,
don't want to participate.
I think it's more. I think that they're closer to West Virginia, where they're really pro-Union. They're pro-Union forces in Kentucky. There were, like you said, I don't have a dog in this fight. We want to try and stay out of it. But the legislature never really, gets off. It does. The governor does call for a secession convention, but it's stopped by Lyons. And the thing is that the Union General Lyons is the one who basically has been intriguing against the military governor, the Union governor in charge of the armory, right, to get him replaced. That's why he ends up going to Washington.
All right, I just clicked on this other map. Is this the same battle?
No, that's
it's hard
the
to tell.
River.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's hard to tell. You literally look up Battle of Belmont, and then they throw like every Western campaign in there. It's fucking annoying. God damn it, get your act together.
Open that up. Is this the? Is this Shiloh? This is Shiloh. You can try to expand that map.
Oh no, it won't expand for me. But yeah, I think you're right. That is Shiloh. We'll get to Shiloh, and like I said, we're gonna cover day one. That's it. That's all we're covering. Just
No,
day one.
No, we're not just covering day one.
It was a great day. But yeah, no, and look how wide the Mississippi River is. So for those movements back and forth across the river, I really think if they would have pressed an assault with their boats, even if it is hard to run these bluffs, they could have done some damage, or maybe they would have been wiped out and Grant would have been killed.
Possibly, but it definitely would have trapped Grant on the wrong side of the battle, right? With inferior troop levels, right? And they were on the attack, so they didn't have prepared defensive positions to fall back into. I mean, they have arrived and they've marched. Okay, so and overall, this also does something else for Grant in that, okay, he literally is the last one to leave, right? His men see this. Okay, men follow leadership. This is an example of extreme leadership. Now, one of the things
he was the last one to leave because he forgot his cask of whiskey. That drunk butcher. Give me a break.
The only time he drank was when nothing was going on. You could hardly say that there was nothing going on at the Battle of Belmont.
I'm sorry. I'm going to use every stereotype I can for Grant. Yeah, the drunken butcher that was scared of blood. Did you know that? He actually, his dad was a butcher, and he wouldn't help his dad because he couldn't stand butchering animals and the sight of blood. He even ate a steak well done. And that's the same man who fucking killed countless
He did
Confederates in
not
battle
kill.
without
He did not kill
without batting an
countless.
eye.
He did not kill that at all. And to say that he didn't bat an eye is just completely ridiculous.
Okay, all right.
We'll
I'll
get,
stop. I'll stop with
we'll get,
the Grant
we'll
slander.
get to that. We'll get to that. Okay. Because Grant is, you like using these 2D characterizations for these guys, and they're not 2D characters. None of them are. Right now, Pillow. Most people probably never heard of Pillow, right? Or that he was a Southern general. But the Fort Pillow, right? When you hear about the Fort Pillow massacre, that is actually a Confederate fort that was named for General Pillow. All right, that was captured by the Union.
Oh, my daughter was talking to me. I missed that. I heard Fort Pillow. Are we jumping forward to Fort Pillow? Is that
no?
That's
No.
in
I was
what,
just
64?
saying most people. I was just saying most people had never heard of Pillow before, right? And I was just letting people.
Oh, the general. Yeah, no. When I saw that on the map, I'm like, wait, do I have the wrong map? Is that Fort Pillow? Wait a minute. I didn't even hear of him.
You don't get Fort Pillow is much later in the war, but and I'm sure we're going to talk about that as well as to what the ramifications of all that. But that's a very controversial battle. Yeah, very controversial battle. Okay.
but well, no, it is. There was things done by both sides. But no, okay. So the state of Missouri right now is in turmoil, really, especially before this battle and probably even more so after. You do have segments of Missouri splitting off and creating roaming bands of Confederates that are loosely tied to Richmond, but not really.
They're not loose bands being created. This is the problem that most people don't realize. For all intents and purposes, these quote unquote loose bands that you're talking about were already in existence. And you have it the same in the Union place. There's a reason they called it Bleeding Kansas, and this is where a lot of these people came from. All right, was within Missouri. All right, on both sides. Now the Union also had the ability to get more people from that came in from the north, Minnesota, several of the other areas that were closely aligned.
Yeah, the abolition hotbeds. Yeah,
but at the same time, a lot of them were in Missouri as well. And what people don't have to know is in Bleeding Kansas, the when chaos reigns, okay, what does this leave an opportunity for? This leaves an opportunity for the most nefarious of the societies, the butchers, the rapists, the guys who want to actually go out there and steal, rob, pillage. All right.
Yeah, the guys that use broadswords that are not even that sharp to cut people in half. Yeah, those type of people.
Yeah, well, those people are roaming on both sides.
It's funny though. I only ever hear about the great fucking John motherfucking Brown. But hey,
because you ignore about Bloody Bill Anderson.
There is Bloody Bill Anderson. There's also Mosby, like we were talking off air. But okay, I believe Bloody Bill Anderson was a snapback, a reaction to the abolition movement coming down.
That's an excuse, because you cannot make that excuse after you know what happened at Lawrence, Kansas. This is not a.
I know what happened in Lawrence, Kansas. They sacked the city. They burnt shit down. They shot people. Yeah.
And this was before, all right, the Civil War began. So you can't come back and say that this is a snap reaction to what had happened. It's not.
It was a reaction to John Brown and his ilk. It was a reaction.
No. It was not. Lawrence, Kansas happens before John Brown. You cannot.
Terrorism breeds terrorism. And I don't think
Kansas was not a reaction to John Brown, in the sense of John Brown's actions came after Lawrence, Kansas.
I want to see the date on Lawrence.
When was John Brown killed?
What, 1859?
Right. So basically a year before that.
Yeah. I swear to God, Lawrence, Kansas happened during the war. or right after John Brown. But I could be wrong. While you're checking that, what's going on, chat? Jacob, yeah, you said you're going to be watching. There you are. How are you doing today, buddy? Let's see. No one's asking any questions, so you got that date? Am I right?
Hold on, hold on. I don't type that fast, especially when my hands hurt like they do.
Oh, dude, I know what I'm going to get you for Christmas. There's that program where you just talk what you want to type and it does it for you. I figure you're getting older. That'll help, right?
I don't need that. No, thank you.
Well, you know, it's a thought that counts.
I got it.
It's okay. I don't even know how to type properly. Like, if somebody that was a typist actually saw the way I type, they'd hate me. I don't finger pick. I do like type, but it's not the correct way at all. So it's all right.
Why is this not giving me the earlier one? It keeps talking. For some reason, this knows that we're talking about the Civil War because it keeps bringing up Quantrell's Raiders.
Fucking Google, I'm telling you, they're evil.
I don't know what it is. Because I found it. I had it right before me. Then I got it. Let me get back to this.
But I do like the story of Quantrell's Raiders, actually. And where's that book I have on Mosby? I have a really good book on Mosby somewhere on my bookshelf. I don't feel like getting up and looking for it. It's not like you guys want me to read excerpts from it anyway, so fuck it. But it is a good book. It's The Gray Ghost. It's a good book. Also have a good book about
Raid on Lawrence, Kansas was in 1856.
Damn. Okay, score this one for the Yanks. Fair enough. Okay, so all right. I'll revamp my question then. It's not necessarily a snap reaction, okay? You have bad parties on both sides that are rising up and causing mischief within the territories because they want one of two outcomes. They either want it to be a free state, supposedly a free state to where nobody that was a slave or ex-slave or free person of color, none of them can settle in their state. They want to keep it for white labor, which is the argument of the free states. Read the Oregon Constitution. The same thing was in the Oregon Constitution when it joined the Union. No blacks were allowed to settle in the state of Oregon. Or you have people that want the extension of slavery into the territories, which means there would be blacks settling in said territory. Maybe they would be freed one day. Chances are probably not. And there would be an extension of slavery, which would prop up the institution itself.
Well, what
both
you
sides
have,
are bad.
The reason you're seeing the attempted expansion, why it's definitely happening, right, is due to the cash crop of cotton. Cotton is it's a hardy plant in a lot of ways, but in order for it to be utilized in a larger scale, right? If you keep planting cotton without any kind of rotation type of methodology even applied, eventually the soil gets ruined. All right, so if you've got a large plantation of cotton and you're focusing on cotton because it's the cash crop and it's how you can afford all these things, and you're not engaged in crop rotation or any of the rest of this, then what happens is your yield over time goes down. Now, that's great. You can let the stuff go fallow if you want to maintain that land and everything, but you got to remember these types of slave owners, right? There's a group of them that say, you know what, they have no real tie to the land. They're not true farmers in that they're working the land with their hands, many of them. And what they have no problem doing is pulling up the whole kit and caboodle, moving on to the next area, buying the land, right, and recreating the plantation until the yields go down again. So there is a segment of the population that's willing to do that. And in Kansas, that was one of the biggest things that was happening. And in fact, many of the people that initially they weren't really anti-slavery per se. They didn't care about trying to free the slaves. They weren't abolitionists, right? But they didn't want these big plantation owners moving in, all right, destroying the land and then moving out again. So that's why they were a lot of it.
Well, that's true, but they also, just like I brought up, they also didn't like the fact that their neighbors would own slaves, and they were still racist. All right, if you
Oh no,
read
there
the
was a
writings of
lot
these
of
people,
there's a lot of racism that goes on. All right, I mean the racism is a byproduct of differences in humans. To be honest, that's just a
fair enough. But okay, so in Missouri, though, you do have these roaming bands, and they are loosely tied to the Confederacy or the Union. Um, but they're not. They don't have a real directive, and they're not necessarily under the thumb of Richmond. So they're allowed to do whatever the fuck they want. That's how you end up with Bloody Bill Anderson throughout the war and Jesse James and these guys.
it's a land of in chaos. Like I said, there's a lot of chaos around. Um, these are larger areas without a large number of troops and a lot of space. All right, this is not settled areas where you got farmlands, farms everywhere. There's actually wide open land that nobody owns. All right, for miles and miles. In many ways, it's similar to Texas in that there's huge tracts of Texas. All right, that people can hide in. All right, and never be seen because nobody owns the land because nothing's in there but dirt for all intents and purposes. Some weeds, maybe a river. Now, in Missouri, Missouri's more forested, right? It gets considerably more water. It's surrounded on either side of it. Missouri is buttressed on either side with the Missouri River on one side, right, and the Mississippi River on the other, right. And as a matter of fact, I mean, eventually the Mississippi and obviously the Missouri River combine, but for all intents and purposes, Missouri is basically one big surrounded by water in that regard. Right now, obviously the north borders Iowa, etc. But I'm not ignoring that. I'm just saying that these are the things about it. These are the conditions that you're dealing with here. All right.
Well, yeah, and if you have a wide open area that is contested territory, to say the least, you're going to have a broader spectrum of violence from both sides. And you're going to have a civilian population, for lack of a better word, in terror from both sides. It doesn't matter if it's the Union Blue marching in or the Confederate Gray, or these roaming bands didn't even wear colors. They didn't fly flags. They were militia groups or mercenaries, if you want to call them that. I mean, you didn't necessarily know it was a Confederate army coming in.
It was you could rightly call most of them bandits.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with you. I like the stories. I like to read about it, but to actually live in that day, if I was living in Missouri, I don't think I would choose either fucking side. I think I'd move out west. I'd pack my shit up and get the fuck on.
So the problem with that view, all right, is, well, first of all, when you're a true farmer, okay, you have a tie to the land. Every farmer that I've ever known, right, and growing up in small town Nebraska, right, and actually growing up on a farm in Nebraska, when you see I've got friends that will be farmers till they die. They have a mental tie to the land. They will never give up that land. I recognize it. I know it exists. I don't have it, right? It almost killed my older brother to have to leave the farm, right? He has that kind of tie to the land. Now, I don't know if he still has it, but he was very reluctant to leave the farm. So I do recognize that it exists, okay? And the same thing would apply to these people who built up their houses. You got to remember, these are people that came in 30 years prior, right? And built their farmlands. They built their houses, or their dad built their houses with their help as they were, growing up, 9, 10. They began to do chores, and they began to, to work the land themselves. These are hardy people that work this, and many of them have suffered, hardships such as their families dying of disease, and so forth. All right. Many of them have their wives or their daughters or their sons, you know, or their fathers, you know, buried, all right, on small little, you know,
Yeah.
home plots all
Yeah.
over these
Yeah.
areas.
Private.
That's how that's all a normal part of that lifestyle. It's not what people we don't generally recognize that today. Of
Well then,
why people.
no, okay, fair enough. But does that mean that they picked a side then? And if they picked a side, what happens when
No, the
the
problem is if you don't pick a side, you become a target for both sides. So you're safer picking a side regardless of what side it is. In these situations, when you're dealing with this kind of an activity, all right, in this kind of chaos, you're better off having picked a side than try and stay in the middle, because all you do by staying in the middle is earn the ire of both sides. If you're on one
so
side,
the
only one side is trying to kill you. If you're in the middle,
so the
both sides are trying to kill you.
okay, fair enough. So this is why Bloody Bill Anderson and Jesse James and Frank James, the younger, all those guys were able to do a raid, and it's then disperse amongst the people and be fed, be housed, be hidden. You know, that's how they were able to continue to operate within the
Well,
state of Missouri all throughout the war.
that and the fact that, like I said, there's lots of movement. There's lots of places to hide. All right. You're not. It's not like everybody sees the James brothers riding into town, right? You know, many of the people who probably were pro-union in those areas probably didn't even know when James was there or when he wasn't there. All right. In the areas that he would work from, right, though, were generally Southern sympathizers, so he had a lot of cover in those areas. The same thing applies to certain Union irregulars, although the Union irregulars didn't last long because the Union put them down.
Other than one that we will talk about later on, the Indian tribe that fought the Confederacy throughout the fucking war,
Well,
even after. We will cover him.
Once again, that is more of a civil war within the Indian tribe than it is that it's unions. Even you could say that there were Confederates, but the reality is in the Indian territories, both sides used Indians as scouts. Yes, most of the Indians in the Indian territories did decide to side with the South. All right, but they were not. They were not. They were a majority, but they weren't an overwhelming majority. It wasn't 90%, 10%. So you have but that dynamic is also playing out now. So you have Kansas, which is in chaos. You have Oklahoma, which is in chaos, and these are areas that are bordering along the Missouri area. All right, so this is another reason why there's a lot of chaos in these areas. There's a lot of turmoil going on, and then of course, like I said, until Lyons basically, ends any kind of rebellion in Missouri, in St. Louis. All right, there's even talk that,
okay, in St. Louis. I'm glad you specified that because, as I said numerous times so far in today's episode, Missouri stays contested by at least Bill Anderson and his partisan writers for quite a bit.
It does not stay contested. All right, Bill Anderson can't do anything. All right, he's a raider.
They continue to raid. They continue to raid. They continue
but the raiding he does, but that's no different than frickin' Dillinger, right? It's no different than Jesse James after the war. Right, you can't take territory. He's not taking territory. He's not holding territory. Yeah, he's raiding. He's stealing. He's murdering. All right. What's the effect? It doesn't have any real outcome effect aside from keeping the passion of the people both for and against him alive. But aside from that, it's really not having any material effect on whether or not Missouri is going to go to the South. At no point in time, all right, after Lyons finishes taking care of St. Louis, and I say that not in a good term because I don't like. I'm not a fan of Lyons. But once that's settled, it's settled. Missouri is not in any danger, okay, of seceding. It's not in any danger of becoming a part of the Confederacy at no point. Now you can't say
no, sorry. I was looking at the chat and Tiger Lily. Too much information. We don't need to know. God damn it. No, but okay. They're not taking territory, but it is somewhat contested by the fact that they're still there. They're still operating with impunity, and they're able to do whatever
they're not
they
operating
want.
with impunity. Do not think that they're operating with impunity. People are chasing them, and at times, if he was operating with impunity, he never would have been shot. He
Yeah,
wouldn't be running. If he was operating with impunity, he could go wherever he wanted, stay wherever he wanted, and there wouldn't be any problem. No, they are not operating with impunity.
Okay, compared to modern day standards, they are. I mean, like really, they're hitting targets and then they're dispersing.
They're hitting small
Anderson,
targets. They're
Anderson
not
does end up
large targets.
Anderson does end up dead, but Jesse James don't. Neither does Frank. They fight until the very end. They had to head south.
They are low-level people. All right. I mean, everyone loves the story of Jesse James, but he is not a major part. He's not one of the quote-unquote leaders. All right. Anderson is a branch of Quantrell's raiders. Quantrell is killed. Okay. So it isn't just a few people. Now, yeah, Jesse James and his brother Frank both survive. All right. But that's the word. Survive. Not just because somebody has to survive unless the entire unit got wiped out. Right. And that was very difficult to do.
Fair enough.
To totally kill everybody as part of a unit.
Fair enough. But here's a point I want to point out, though. Where I was going with these partisan raiders, especially Quantrell. It's hard to say his name. That's why I say Bill Anderson more, even though he was his subordinate. I get that. But the thing is, they couldn't even surrender in Missouri after the war. They had to retreat down into the inner South and then surrender, pretending to be a part of like a Mississippi brigade or something like that. They couldn't even surrender and admit what they were doing because they weren't recognized as real Confederate troops. That's the point I'm trying to point out.
They weren't recognized as real Confederate troops because they never operated under any kind of Confederate banner. They just said, you know what, we're going to say we're Confederates, and then we're going to go ahead and raid. And they didn't just, whether you like it or not, they didn't just hit, all right, only northern stuff. There were times when they sit up there and stole land, food, and horses, all right, from quote-unquote Confederates because they needed it.
I've never actually read that account.
Well, so, it's part of, you know, we're commandeering this for the cause. You never heard about that?
I never heard about them doing that to any Southern sympathizers or going down south and raiding a Southern railhead or anything. I've never heard about.
They never hit a railhead, no, but they would hit farmlands and some of the farmlands that were out there. And if people had a horse that they needed, they just grabbed it and took it. There's a reason they were called thieves.
Yeah, and do you think if Braxton Bragg in some alternate reality was able to handle the Western campaign and he actually moved up into Missouri to hold the territory and use that to jump up, further north?
Bragg would have been better served.
Could Braxton Bragg actually control these people is my fucking question. Could he have actually controlled Quantrell? Could he have controlled Anderson? Or would he have had to arrest him or get him the fuck out of there somehow? Send him to Western Virginia or something?
No, I suspected
get the fuck out of here.
I suspected that there was no controlling of them. All right, they were not there to be controlled. All right. You also got to remember there's one more aspect which I didn't bring up, but I should have, which is this is feuding territory. Okay. These are families feuding with each other as well. Okay, where people say that I'm, Johnny's for the South, so therefore I'm for the Union, right? The James brothers weren't universally loved in their territories, right? They had their own personal enemies and family enemies, and there were family treachery that went on as well, right? Just like the Hatfields and McCoys, right? There's that aspect that was going on as well.
Yeah, no, and I don't know when we should get to the Hatfield and McCoys. Maybe we could just talk about them tonight, since this battle was such a short one. We covered it in 15
Well, it's
minutes.
a very small. Overall, it's a small battle. I think casualties are like 600 on either side.
Yeah, I didn't go to the casualty list. That's right. I think the Confederates had slightly more casualties. I'll go over here and look real quick.
But
that way we can stay with the real number. Okay, casualties for the Union, 607. Casualties for the Confederates in their victory, quote unquote, was 641. Now, if they did have a victory here, why did they have to turn tail and head south? They don't hold Missouri. They never do throughout the war.
Well, no, because the army coming through the Kentucky is forcing them south.
Yeah, but couldn't you make a stand at the Mississippi River and not let them pass there?
Once again, the Union isn't idle. It's not sitting around not building those gunboats that eventually appear. Okay? And if you sit up there and try to make a stand against the Missouri River, you append yourself, you've lost movement. Once you lose movement, you can get destroyed. So you're going to lose your entire army. The one thing that you can't afford to do as a Southerner is you cannot afford to get fixed into a battle. If you get fixed into a battle, all right, your army eventually will be destroyed, because the Union could just keep bringing up troops, all right, and play a defensive game in a siege.
If you're the Union in this battle, let's get this part out of the way before we expand, because now I kind of do want to talk about the Hatfield and McCoys, because that is a really interesting topic. But before we get sidetracked a little bit, you're Ulysses S. Grant. How do you crush this Confederate army?
Need more troops, or you have to sit up there and entice them into the attack. This is very difficult to do. Right, because that army is not on the attack. It's not an aggressive army. It's not looking to attack. Right, and the reason it's not looking to attack is that it, at this point in time, in this situation specifically, right, it actually has more troops than what Grant has initially available. All right, so what you do is, okay, well then if I'm going to go on the attack and they have no intention of going on the attack, then what do I have to do to crush them? I'm going to have to outmaneuver them, pen them, fix them, what they call fixing in battle. We find them, fix them, and then destroy them.
Yeah, but at one point, Grant thinks he's done this, right? We saw the map. They are encircled until the Confederates are able
he knows that that's only a small part of them, though. He took it upon himself to say, okay, I can crush a small little part, right? And if you can with a smaller army, you can beat a bigger army. If you are able to constantly attack it in detail, where you're bringing more people to the fight initially, and then as more troops come up, you back away. This is exactly what Stonewall Jackson does in the Shenandoah Valley campaign. Is he fights as soon as the Union starts to increase its power to the point where it's either on equity or has more, he backs away. Not all those battles that people think about when they talk about the Shenandoah Valley campaign. Not all those battles were necessarily considered Confederate victories, because they weren't.
Well, no.
Confederates lost more. But the difference is by doing this and constantly being on the move, all right, it kept these other groups occupied.
Well, no, and we want to talk about on the move and General Jackson. I want to bring up Chancellorsville. I believe that's the battle where Robert E. Lee splits his army. Oh, Chancellorsville is where, yeah. Well, fuck off. You're a dick. Damn it. That took all the air out of my fucking whole spiel. Okay, well, before he fucking dies, Robert E. Lee splits the army and gives half of it, or a little less than half, to General Jackson, and he makes a fucking marathon march all the way around the Union army and attacks its flank. that's up in the air about 15 miles away.
Well, he does a night march, right? And successful in a night march. That's very true.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
But,
and if you watch Gods and Generals, I love that part of the movie.
But the thing is that what did it achieve?
It achieved a Confederate victory. It rolled up the line the next day.
It didn't destroy the Army of the Potomac. It didn't even really maul them that badly. The victory at Chancellorsville is actually, very much a Pyrrhic victory, right? And in fact, Lee is absolutely furious because he thought he had the chance to destroy the Army of the Potomac, and he failed again. And in fact, Longstreet even says, he goes, Chancellorsville, everyone wants to talk about Chancellorsville, but the reality is that the best battle they fought, right, was Second Manassas.
Ooh, because that's what we're getting into next week, isn't it? I think it is. Yeah, nice.
Okay. Because they did actually, severely damage the Army of the Potomac at the Battle of Second Manassas, right?
And can we skip Gettysburg when we get to there?
We're not skipping Gettysburg.
Damn it. You won't give me any leadway on this shit. No.
We're going to get rid of a few Union generals that need to be getting rid of it at Gettysburg. One of the main reasons that the South is doing so well in the East is due to several Union generals that needed they weren't in charge of the Army, but they were close enough to cause problems. And we finally get rid of them.
I know some Confederates I would like to trade you. You could take Bragg. I'll take McDowell.
No, I'm not giving you McDowell. I'm going to give you Dan Sickles, though.
For Bragg? No. Bragg's better than him.
Bragg was better than Dan Sickles. I won't deny that. We'll talk about that when we get to Gettysburg.
No. And let's go into some random Civil War stuff. All right, the Hatfields and McCoys, man. The whole thing that panned out of that, it all started within the Civil War. What was James that's the fucking lead singer from Metallica. Damn it. What was Hatfield's name? Fucking his first name.
I don't remember which one was who the patriarch was.
Well, him and the McCoy guy, they served together in the Confederate Army, and the McCoy guy actually deserted, if I remember correctly, and went home. And that's where the feud actually started. It didn't necessarily start with the hog, the famous hog trial. They stole my pig, which was actually a big thing. Like it or not, these people had to live, and they were subsistence farmers, and they lived through the winter on their hogs. Yes. So that was a big deal, but it really originated within the Civil War, I believe. And the fact that one McCoy served for the Union. He's the one that ends up getting murdered, I believe. The other McCoy served for the Confederacy with Hatfield and deserted, and that started a personal feud over quote-unquote honor. Hatfield stayed throughout the entire fucking war, survived it, saw the horror, why fucking McCoy went home like a little bitch. Pretty much. Well, you can tell what side I take on this feud, but
it's also a fact of there's some people have better land than the others. All right, this is truly a family affair kind of feud, very much along the lines of the kind of tribal warfare that you get in the Middle East. Where this chieftain sits up there and says, has this territory and wants to claim it back, and they fight, inter-scene gang wars. It's very similar to the gang wars that you have within cities when they're fighting for turf. It's that kind of a mentality that's going.
Yeah, but this time they were fighting for logging rights, correct? Pretty much.
That and farmland. I mean, it was in some ways it was overblown as well. I mean, it wasn't constant battling warfare, right? It's just people got shot here and there, and then a couple weeks later, a few months later, a couple more people get shot back and forth, and it's going back and forth like that.
Well, no, and the crazy part is in this the area of the Appalachians that this all happened, it was split between Kentucky and where did the McCoys live? They lived across the river in the neighboring state, which I'm drawing a blank here, Missouri.
Tennessee?
Or Tennessee, something like that. I'm drawing a blank, total blank on this. I didn't do any research. We just decided, or I decided, hey, let's talk about the Hatfields and McCoys, fill out this episode. But they would have, you know, dueling sheriffs and shit, you know. Like, if you crossed the river and you were a Hatfield, you could be arrested and charged over there. If you crossed the river and you were a McCoy, then the Hatfields might kill you and get the fuck away with it. You know, it was really interesting how this all played out. And it wasn't, you know...
West Virginia.
Like, West Virginia. There you go. And it wasn't like... It wasn't like what, you know, they say. MC's right. This took, like, almost a decade or more, this feud actually kept going, right? And it was just in the modern era that the two families actually came together and shook hands and put it aside finally. That's like 150 years of these two families hating each other and being known for it, you know?
Yes, very much so. Here, let me see if I can pull up one of the maps. And I can share it with you guys. Here. Can you see the map?
Yep. I'll present you to everybody. That way it doesn't go away while I talk.
So this is the river. This is the river that he's talking about. I'm not sure which river this is. Which river? Although it says Tug Fork, I've never heard of that stream. But as you can see, you have West Virginia on this side. You have Kentucky on this side. All right. So you have McCoy's basically over through here. You've got, and here's where the Hatfields generally were. All right. So, and of course, this is the big part of the Hatfield. So this is one of the reasons why, as you were saying, you know, people were thinking of this as, you know, still the Union in the South as it's being applied, right? And it shows the different. This map here shows you the different areas where fighting breaks out and people were dying. So it is a family in many of these areas in the Appalachians, but you have what he said, you know, the family feuds taking place. But the other aspect of it is, of course, I'm going to go ahead and close this down, is that's also taking place in areas like Missouri, right, and so forth. So it's the same thing. Okay, it's the same type of mentality which is also going on. So you, once again, the people in the middle don't last long. And what I mean by don't last long is basically they're at some point in time they're going to be forced to choose a side. I mean, when you really take a look at it, if you really want to look at it, there's one of Clint Eastwood's best movies, The Outlaw Josie Wales, is a case of exactly that. You have the Civil War going on. All right, you have a situation in now this is a, you know, obviously a fictional account. But you have Union comes in, terrorize, basically to try and steal all the food. Right, a group that's quote unquote loosely aligned to the Union. He's just a farmer trying to sit it out. He gets whacked on the head. They think he's dead. They shoot his wife. They shoot his kids. Right, they steal everything that he's got. And when he wakes up, he joins the Confederacy to fight for him, to fight against the Confederate, you know, against the Union for the Confederacy. And that's where it's even mentioned in there, and this is very true. It said, this is a man who lives by the feud. He said, the only way you're going to stop this is by killing him, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Jacob in the chat asked a question. It's a pretty good one, actually. How many of each other's family did they both kill, or did they even kill each other? They did. So the Hatfields actually fucking... So how many McCoys? It was 3 brothers, I believe, that killed Hatfield's his brother or something like that. And Hatfield captured them, took them to an isolated spot in the mountains, and tortured the fuck out of them and blew their heads off. He never got prosecuted for it. He got away with it. Everybody knew he fucking did it. He told everybody he fucking did it. He wanted McCoy to know he did it. it was revenge. These people killed each other.
Yes, this is very much a family feud. I mean, a true family feud in that, you know, they had taken to the point where they had killed each other, right? And I think the first death though was probably, I can say that the first death wasn't an intentional attack, right? The shooting that began was because the events around it collapsed into that point. Right? It wasn't the fact that they were out there trying to go out of their way to kill somebody from the McCoys or kill somebody from the Hatfields, right? But after that, it was basically on. There's no excuse for not killing.
Yeah, and
So
the History Channel did a really good job doing a show about the Hatfield and McCoys. They had Kevin Costner play in Hatfield, actually. And they did a really good job. And there's this one scene in it where the younger McCoy guy, the one that served for the Union, he got injured and sent home. Well, he goes into the bar, wearing his Union jacket. And they're all like, take that fucking off. He's like, well, I'll take it off. But this is all I own, guys. Like, this is all they sent me home with. I just want to have a drink. And it was a friend of the Hatfield family that actually progressed it and ended up throwing the guy out of the bar and stuff. And that's another spot where it kind of hit a flashpoint. There was a Union Confederate twinge in there, especially when one McCoy served for the Union, got injured, I believe, in Shiloh or something. I don't remember exactly. And sent home early, while the other McCoy ran off and deserted the Confederate Army. Which, MC, you're a military man. Isn't desertion the worst crime you can do?
No,
really?
No, not the worst, but it's up there. You can get shot for desertion. But no, it's not the worst crime. The worst crime is to actually, in the middle of battle, shoot your own troops and be a turncoat.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. I forgot about Benedict Arnold. But, desertion, Robert E. Lee said one time, desertion is, or no, it was Thomas Jefferson. Desertion is the most horrible crime against the Confederate Army, because while your brothers are still fighting and suffering, you're a coward and you run away, and you not only hurt the cause itself, but you cause others to desert. You end up with this mass desertion that starts to happen as people sneak off and run off. You know what I mean?
Right, but let's be honest about some of this, right? Because desertion is an issue for both armies during the entire war, right? That they have to contend with. But why were people deserting? Were they deserting because they were afraid? Sure, you could say that there's cases of that happening. But the other aspect of it is that a lot of these people are deserting to go home. They want to go. They came to fight initially. They expected it to be one battle, two battles maybe, and then they get to go home. And after the Battle of Manassas or Bull Run, the first Bull Run, right, where the troops are called up and said, okay, you're in the military for the duration, especially for the South. The South was the first one to institute this. They said, okay, you're in it for the duration now. A lot of people were very upset about that. And they felt that they had done their duty, all right, that they had stood in battle. Many of them had received wounds from the previous battles. They themselves do not consider themselves cowards, all right, but at the same time, they've got family to take care of. They're getting letters from home talking about how bad it is, that they need to have, their sons or their daughter, their daughter is now having issues, or their wives, or all these things are a part of this, right? They all play a part in it. So you do have, and you have Confederate troops that stick it out through the entire war. But at the same, and just like you have Union troops that stick it out through the entire war. But the Union,
well, yeah, absolutely. My family member served throughout the war for the Louisiana Tigers and was buried with Confederate, like a Confederate fucking, marker, tombstone, and all that stuff. So, I am still trying to join the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I just have to prove my lineage, and then I'll be able to join. But yeah, a lot of the Confederates did serve throughout the war, but there was a lot of people that deserted and headed west to avoid being shot.
Well, but that's more toward the very end. All right, the desertion problem that continued throughout for the South, that continued throughout the entire war. All right, had a lot of people, a lot of troops, right, actually would leave, go home, be home, do whatever needed to be home, and then come back. Okay, which is another positive that the South had, right? Whereas the Union, once they were released to go home, many of those Union troops did not come back. Now, there were incidents where many of the people were brought back in chains, and some of them were summarily shot for desertion.
Yeah, Stonewall actually put his name on a couple orders to shoot deserters, and some of them were from the Stonewall Brigade.
Yeah,
so that's really
Stonewall was really he was really a hard man to love. He was very much a by the book kind of person, and if you violated any small little rule or any little infraction like that, he was very harsh on his own troops. His own troops did not love him. Okay, in some ways, it's reminiscent of Patton. Later on, his own troops really didn't like him as a person, and didn't really they liked him as a commander in that he gave them victories. All right, and they knew that they could win with him as the commander. But on a personal level, you did not have the troops cheering, Stonewall Jackson as he rode past them like they did Lee and like they did Longstreet. And they did Grant and Sherman. So, but yeah, I mean, but getting back to this portion of it, Missouri now is the battle you're starting to see the battle spread. There's little firefights that are happening all over the place, including in the Indian Territory. Now, Missouri, because of what it occupied, all right, if it had fallen to the South, if it had decided to join the South and truly rose up, all right, would have been a very difficult blow, all right, for the Union. Because the one thing that I think that if Missouri had not gone to the South, if Missouri had gone to the South, it's very, very possible, if not probable, that the Union would never have been able to totally control the Mississippi. That's how important Missouri actually was. So,
sorry. Go ahead. There's a stupid hornet on the ceiling. I gotta get rid of him. So keep talking. Oh wait, he went outside. Good. I hate bees.
Well, if you'd stop teasing them, maybe they wouldn't stop going to the house.
Oh no, those fucking hornets too, man. Those are fuckers. They'll sting you multiple times and bite you. Like, fuck those guys. Anyway, go ahead. Let's get back to the Civil War. Sorry,
right.
BFO here.
Basically, what I was saying is if Missouri had actually seceded, this could have changed the whole dynamic of the war, because it probably would have meant that throughout the war, the South would not have been able to, or the North would not have been able to actually seal Missouri, that the South would continue to hold the Mississippi River, that would have been always open at some point in time. It would have been very difficult for the Union to actually divide the South along the Mississippi River if Missouri would have stayed, or would have went with the Confederacy, rather.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the real blow came, when they ended up pulling out of Missouri and surrendering it. Because then they had they had full access to the Mississippi River. They end up taking New Orleans, which we'll get to in a couple weeks. And it gets really, really bad really, really quickly. But Tiger Lily in the chat asked, were there any spies during the Civil War? Yes, there was. There's this woman who lived in D.C. actually, who was a Confederate spy. She ended up getting caught and hung.
Okay,
But,
let's talk about this for a moment, because there's two things going on here that people, when we talk about spies, what they mean by spies, right? Both the North and the South created spy networks. They actually created dedicated spies to go in and infiltrate the other side. For all intents and purposes, though, that kind of intrigue remained in the East. Okay, in the West, you didn't have the kind of dedicated spies per se, but what you did is you had sympathizers on both sides that would relay information back and forth. All right, you had people that were scouts for lack of, for all intents and purposes, they were really scouting for the armies. All right, to do this. But the really intrigued spies with the codes and the skullduggery and the assassination plots and so forth, all right, were carried on by both sides throughout the war. In fact, one of the more, while MADD has relayed one of the Southern spies when she was caught, her fate, actually in the Jefferson Davis's White House in Richmond, right? One of the slaves that worked in that White House was a Union spy throughout the war, and was constantly passing on information that was coming straight from the White House, all right, of the Confederacy.
Wow, I've actually never heard that story. I'll have to look into that one. Also, since we got into the spy aspect here, the Confederate Secret Service operated out of Montreal, Canada. They did have a meeting with John Wilkes Booth on one or two occasions. John Wilkes Booth actually went up to Canada once, for sure. It's documented. They did not want John Wilkes Booth to kill Abraham Lincoln. They wanted him to kidnap him. They wanted to ransom Lincoln back for an end of the war. That's what they wanted to do. They did not want John Wilkes Booth to blow his fucking head off in Ford's Theater.
Okay, now why was that?
I believe because that violated the rules of war at the time.
There were no rules of war.
But also, Abraham Lincoln had a plot.
There was no Geneva Convention at this point.
Well, I know that, but they had a gentleman's agreement on the way war should be. Pretty much, it was almost like the European style. Still, they were transferring from the gentleman's war into more of a total war
but you never had that gentleman's agreement. Was really. I mean, it wasn't really as thick and as. I mean, we all like to talk about, when we talk about it from a military standpoint, people in the military. You'll hear them try and use these kind of grandiose terms, all right, because they don't want to, go into the details of what the kind of butchery warfare was, and even prior to this, people forget the fact that when armies move, they often ravage, and I'm not just talking about Civil War. I'm talking about during this time frame throughout the world. When armies moved, whether it's an Asian army, whether it's a European army, whether it's an African army, when they went through an area, they went through it like a freaking plague of locusts, right? That's generally what was happening. All right. If you were a civilian and an army marched through your area, it left that area devastated generally. Not always, but generally. Now, of course, where this normally happened, where the devastation was always the worst, was it when the invading army was going through the defending army's territory, because they had no compunction about, just ripping it and tearing away any kind of foodstuffs or anything that was an area that supplied the enemy, all right, arms, weapons, and so forth. So it was always the invading armies that did the most damage. And even in the Civil War, the two times that you have Lee actually go north, you have this kind of activity taking place. Now, is it on a mass scale throughout for long periods? for long periods of time? No, it wasn't. But it did happen. All right, this was an aspect.
Yes.
Of
You know what they
warfare
stole?
worldwide.
You know what they stole? Shoes,
They didn't
clothing,
just steal shoes.
and fucking food.
They
Like,
didn't just
come
steal
on.
food. They didn't just steal clothing, although generally that was the higher priority because people were hungry. Um, uh, which did happen during. He's trying to defend the march into Gettysburg and the Southern troops, what they were doing there. But no, it was an aspect of what all war was like at that point. So when you come back and say, well, there's a gentleman's agreement, really, that in a certain way, that happened more often in our Civil War than it did in reality in other wars. And that's mainly because you literally did have cases where you had brothers fighting brothers. You had a brother would go to join the Union, another brother would go to join the Confederacy. Right?
Especially in the border states, not so much in like New York or New Jersey,
Believe it or
Pennsylvania.
not,
It's kind of a border state.
it wasn't as common, but it did even happen there. There in Pennsylvania, for example, there were several cases where family members were fighting each other on both sides of the battle. Now, granted, it did happen more often in the border states where passions were intermixed a lot more, um, so you had less of an opportunity. But it did happen. So. This is what the war was going into. Now, at this point in time, when we started this battle, with the battle that we're talking about, it's still early on in the war. As you saw, you're talking about 3,000 troops, 3,100 troops on one side, and you have 5,000 troops basically on the other side. Right? These are dwarfed in comparison to what's going to be happening and what's going to happen going forward. Right?
Oh yeah.
Scale are going to increase dramatically. Now, what is interesting about this battle, though, is while yes, these newer battles are going to be larger on a larger scale, the intensity was very similar in that if you take a look at the casualty counts, all right, the casualties were close to 20% for the smaller army, right, and just over 12% for the larger army. All right, even here you can see that if large armies clash, there's going to be a lot of people killed. There's going to be a lot of dead. There's going to be a lot of wounded, and the wounds that are happening due to the technology at the time are truly horrifying. Because you're not just firing small little balls. You're firing mini balls, which is if it hits an arm, if it hits a leg, it doesn't just break the arm and break the leg. It basically blows apart the bone to the point where you can't put it together again. This is why there's so many people losing limbs during the Civil War.
Oh, absolutely, and this is why a lot of them came out of the war addicted to morphine and stuff like that. I took a look at the next battle on the list. We're staying in the West. Excuse me. The second battle is the Henry Donaldson campaign, February 6th through the 16th of 1862. General Grant, once again, well, never mind. We won't go into what he took.
Well, let's not give him too much credit early on, right?
Yeah, well, fucking Grant. he takes a couple forts, so it kind of answers my question last weekend where I asked, why not create these forts up in by Harper's Ferry to defend against the downward motion of the Union, because they repeatedly go the same fucking route. I mean, like, where they're going to come from. Why not build a fort there to block their way? And, well, the West is going to show us why building a fort was a bad idea. So.
Well, okay, but there's a difference there's a different reason for building a fort. Okay, in the West, you are correct. It is going to show you why you don't want to necessarily be building fixed positions. All right, but at the same time, what they're doing, where these forts are an attempt by the South early on to try and control the waterways. The reason, the one thing that people have to understand is, and I would like you know, you guys that are listening to understand, is why were the waterways in the West so important? Because this was the fastest means of travel. These were the routes of access. Is you did it through the water, not through the roads. And the reason is, and you'll see it as we go into this, go through some of these battles, how these roads during certain times and certain situations with the weather can just turn a road into a quagmire. Instead of being a pathway or a way for movement of troops, it becomes an obstacle to troop movement, right? So, but on a river, you never have to worry about it. If it's raining, okay, it's raining on the river, big deal. We're still moving on the river, right? You still got the same amount of speed back and forth along the river ways.
Yeah, no, and this looks like mainly a gunboat battle against the two forts. But all right. Do we want to go into more of the Roman bands or any more feuds or anything, or do we want to wrap it up here? We've been keeping these Civil War episodes fairly short for easy consumption. Short by Red Eye standards, at least.
Yeah, I think that we should just keep it short at the moment, because we're going to get into the Port Donaldson campaign, although that may have to wait till Sunday next week.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. Thank you everybody for watching. This has been another episode of MC and MADD Talking Civil War. We will be back next Sunday, it sounds like, with a longer episode, I'm sure, because we're going to cover a whole campaign. We're still in the West. Soon, hopefully, we'll move back to the East, where the Confederates have some victories. I just saw Buttercup joined. You're late, Buttercup. Man. Anyway, it's history. You probably don't like it anyway. No, I'm kidding. Good night. Good luck. We'll be back on the Red Eye on Monday.